3 times David Bowie nearly collapsed during the Lazarus opening night. The first time, his assistant Corinne Schwab caught him. The second time, his wife Iman rushed to his side. The third time, a private doctor was called backstage, but Bowie didn't give up. Black suit, thin frame, that iconic smile. Makeup artist Karen Alder spent 40 minutes preparing David Bowie's face that evening. That's unusually long for a theater opening. But this wasn't an ordinary opening. Karen had special concealers in her hands. Bowie looked in the mirror and said, "I look like a ghost." Because Bowie was right. What she was trying to hide under the makeup was so obvious that even the carefully controlled lighting couldn't fully mask it. And for months after, nobody publicly asked why did Bowie look so different that night. When his final album, Blackstar, was released 2 days after his death on January 8, 2016, the answer was devastating. That makeup wasn't vanity. It was armor. And every appearance was a farewell message. As you read this story, you'll learn about David Bowie's last public appearance, the truth he kept hidden, and the painful reality concealed behind 40 minutes of makeup. And maybe you'll ask yourself, would you want to face your final curtain call with dignity, strength, and art? December 6, 2015, the day before. The phone rang at Bowie's Lafayette Street apartment in Manhattan. When assistant Corinne Schwab answered, she heard producer Robert Fox's voice. "Tomorrow's the opening. Is David ready?" Corinne looked toward David's bedroom. He was resting, but sleep didn't come easily anymore. His body was waging a war against an enemy that couldn't be defeated. "He's not at full strength," Corinne said carefully. She'd been with David for decades. She knew how to protect his privacy while telling enough truth. Robert's voice was steady but emotional. "The show has to go on. This is David's last chance to see his dream realized. If he doesn't attend, people will only remember him as the man who disappeared. But if he shows up tomorrow, they'll remember the Starman who never stopped creating." Corinne knew he was right. David had spent 18 months in near-total seclusion, fighting liver cancer while creating what would become his final masterworks, Blackstar and Lazarus. The world didn't know. David wanted it that way. She hung up and went to David. She knocked softly. "Come in." His voice was weaker than it used to be, but still unmistakably Bowie, that distinct timbre that had captivated millions. "David, tomorrow's the Lazarus opening. Robert says." "I know what he says." Bowie sat up slowly, wincing slightly. "And he's right. I have to be there." Corinne sat beside him. "Are you sure? You don't have to prove anything to anyone. The work speaks for itself." Bowie looked at her with those heterochromatic eyes, one pupil permanently dilated from a teenage fight, creating the illusion of different colored eyes. It had become part of his mystique. But now those eyes held something different, determination mixed with acceptance. "This isn't about proving anything. Lazarus is my dream. I wrote it about Thomas Newton, the alien who fell to Earth and couldn't go home. That was always my story, Corinne, the perpetual outsider, the man who never quite belonged anywhere but created his own universe. And I need to see it come to life. One last time." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent my entire career creating characters, reinventing myself. Ziggy, Aladdin Sane, the Thin White Duke. But Thomas Newton was different. I played him in 1976, and I've never stopped being him in some way. An alien observing humanity, trying to understand love, loss, addiction, isolation. Lazarus is my chance to give me, a proper ending." That night, Iman helped David to the bathroom. He stood in front of the mirror, studying his reflection. The weight loss was dramatic. He'd dropped from around 150 pounds to barely 100. The treatments had left their mark. His cheekbones, always prominent, now seemed to cut through his skin. "I look like I'm already becoming a ghost," he said quietly. Iman wrapped her arms around him from behind, careful not to press too hard. "You look like my husband. You look like David." He touched her hand. Her presence had been his anchor through all of this. They'd been married for 24 years, and she'd stood by him through everything: his sobriety, his heart attack in 2004, and now this final battle. Tomorrow the makeup needs to be heavy, very heavy. I don't want them to see me like this, not yet. I know, Iman whispered. Karen will handle it. She always does. Bowie stared at his reflection for a long moment. This is my last public appearance, isn't it? Iman couldn't answer. They both knew the truth. David had already made peace with it. That's what Blackstar was. A planned farewell, a final gift timed to be released on his 69th birthday, just days before his death. That's what Lazarus was. A theatrical goodbye disguised as art. I'm not afraid, David said finally. I'm just sad I won't see how the story continues. But I suppose that's the point, isn't it? The alien never gets to go home. He just transforms into something else. Energy, memory, music. December 7th, 2015. Opening night, 6 p.m. When David Bowie stepped out of the car at the New York Theater Workshop, winter had already settled into the city. The temperature had dropped to the low 30s, and small groups of people had gathered outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legend. Iman was beside him. Corinne followed closely, watching David's every movement. A few photographers had been allowed, carefully selected, carefully managed. They captured what would become some of the last images of David Bowie alive. The small crowd gasped when they saw him. Even with the black suit carefully tailored to disguise his frame, even with the makeup Karen would perfect inside, they could see something had changed. But he was there. He was smiling. He was David Bowie. "Mr. Bowie, over here!" a photographer called. David turned, struck a pose. Old habits never die, and gave them that famous smile. For a moment, it was like the old days. The consummate performer, always aware of the camera, always creating the image. But Corinne saw what others didn't. The slight tremor in his hand, the way he leaned almost imperceptibly on Iman, the deep breath he took before facing the crowd. Inside the theater, in a private room, makeup artist Karen Alder was waiting. She'd worked with David before on various projects, but tonight felt different. When Robert Fox had called her 3 days ago, his voice had been heavy with unspoken meaning. "Karen, we need you for the Lazarus opening. David specifically requested you, and Karen, this is important. Very important. He needs to look like himself." She'd understood. In the industry, everyone whispered, David Bowie hadn't been seen in public for months. The rare paparazzi photos that surfaced showed a man transformed by illness. But tonight, he needed to be the David Bowie the world remembered. Black eyeshadow, careful contouring, special concealers lined up on the table. She'd brought everything she might need. David sat in the chair slowly, each movement calculated to conserve energy. Karen looked at his face and felt her heart break. He'd lost so much weight. The illness had carved away at him, revealing the skull beneath the skin. "How bad is it?" David asked, noticing her expression. He'd always been perceptive, reading people with uncanny accuracy. "It's not bad. You're still you." David looked in the mirror. "I look like a sketch of myself, Karen. Let's not pretend." It was so perfectly Bowie, self-aware, darkly humorous, refusing to sugarcoat reality while simultaneously preparing to transform it. Karen picked up her brush. "Then let me do my job. By the time I'm done, you'll be David Bowie again. Not a sketch, not a patient, just you. The you the world needs to see tonight." For 40 minutes, Karen worked. She covered the hollow places, smoothed the rough patches where treatments had damaged his skin, created shadows and highlights that restored dimension to his face. Each brushstroke was an act of love and defiance against what was happening to this man. She emphasized his eyes, still striking, still capable of piercing through to the truth of things. She defined his cheekbones, those famous bone structure that had made him a photographer's dream for 5 decades. She gave him back his face. When she finished, Bowie stood slowly, using the chair for support, and looked in the mirror. For a moment, he saw it. The Starman, the Thin White Duke, the Goblin King, the artist who had reinvented himself 1,000 times. Perfect, he said softly. One more transformation, one more character, the man who came to say goodbye without saying it. But Karen saw something in his eyes. Not fear, sadness. The deep, unquenchable sadness of a man who knows he's saying goodbye but can't tell anyone directly. It had to be hidden in the art, coded in the lyrics, performed as one final piece of theater. The theater was packed. Friends, collaborators, press, fans who'd won the lottery for tickets. Everyone wanted to see Lazarus, Bowie's musical about the alien who couldn't go home. Tickets had sold out in minutes when they went on sale months earlier. The room hummed with anticipation and something else, a kind of nervous energy, as if everyone sensed they were witnessing something historic without quite knowing why. When David entered the theater lobby for the pre-show reception, a hush fell over the room. He looked thin, yes, different certainly, but he was there. He was present. He was smiling. And despite everything, despite the illness ravaging his body, he radiated that ineffable quality that had always defined him: charisma, presence, star power. Playwright Enda Walsh approached first, emotion evident in his voice. "David, the show is incredible. Your vision." "Our vision," Bowie corrected gently. "I just provided the music and the madness. You all made it real. You took my scattered thoughts about aliens and addiction and alienation and turned them into something coherent, something beautiful." He moved through the crowd slowly, deliberately, shaking hands, accepting embraces carefully. His body couldn't take much pressure anymore, but he didn't want people to know that. Answering questions about the music, about Thomas Newton, about his creative process. "Is it true you recorded the Blackstar album while creating Lazarus?" someone asked. "Yes," David replied. "They're companion pieces, really. Two ways of exploring the same themes: mortality, transformation, the search for meaning. The album is more abstract, more coded. The musical is more direct. Both are about coming to terms with endings." He didn't say his own ending, but everyone would understand later. After about 20 minutes of this, smiling, talking, performing the role of David Bowie, artist at peace, it happened. The first collapse. He swayed, just slightly, but Corinne saw it. She'd been watching him like a hawk. She was there instantly, her hand under his elbow, steadying him. "I'm fine," he whispered. "You need to sit." Not yet, not in front of them. Gary Oldman, his old friend, appeared at just the right moment. "Bowie, you look like you need a drink." David smiled, that famous smile that had charmed millions. "Can't do that, Gary. I'm an alcoholic. So it would be the kiss of death for me to start drinking again. 30 years sober, and I'd like to keep it that way. How about you get me one of those fancy waters instead? The kind with the bubbles that make you feel sophisticated." Gary laughed, but his eyes were concerned. He'd seen the sway too. "Coming right up, mate." When Gary returned with the water, he leaned in close. "You all right?" "I'm exactly where I need to be," David replied, "doing exactly what I need to do." It wasn't really an answer, but Gary understood. Some things didn't need to be said aloud. When the show started, David sat in the back with Iman, Corinne, and a small group of close friends, including his longtime producer, Tony Visconti. The lights went down. The music started. His music, transformed into theater. The opening notes of Lazarus filled the space. "Look up here. I'm in heaven. I've got scars that can't be seen." As Thomas Newton appeared on stage, singing about being trapped on Earth, unable to return to the stars, David's eyes filled with tears. Iman felt his hand tighten on hers. This was his story. The alien who came to Earth and changed everything but could never go home. The outsider who became a legend but remained alone. The artist who gave everything to his art and wondered if that was enough. On stage, Newton struggled with addiction, isolation, and the weight of immortality. watching everyone he loved grow old and die while he remained unchanged. It was David's life, refracted through science fiction, made safe through allegory. "It's beautiful," Iman whispered. "It's true," David whispered back. The first act progressed, songs David had written decades ago mixed with new compositions from Blackstar. Life on Mars, changes, heroes, all given new context within Newton's story. The audience was transfixed, but halfway through the first act, David felt the pain intensify. His breathing became shallow. The cancer was relentless, and the effort of being here, of sitting upright, of maintaining composure, was taking its toll. Corinne noticed immediately. "David?" "I'm okay. Let me watch, please. This is why I came." He made it to intermission, but barely. When the lights came up, he could no longer hide it. Iman helped him to a private room backstage. His personal physician, Dr. Mark Collins, who'd been waiting nearby, came immediately. The doctor checked his vitals with practiced efficiency. "Your heart rate is elevated, David. Your blood pressure is concerning. We should go to the hospital." Bowie shook his head firmly. "No, I'm staying until the end. This is my dream, doctor. I've been creating my whole life. Albums, characters, performances, personas. And this is one of my final creations. I'm going to see how it ends. I'm going to see if Newton finds peace." "Mr. Bowie." "I said no." There was fire in his voice, the same determination that had driven him through 5 decades of constant reinvention. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll be fine for the second act." Dr. Collins looked at Iman, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They both knew there was no arguing with David when he made up his mind. During those 10 minutes, the room was silent. Iman held his hand. Corinne stood by the door, tears streaming down her face. The doctor monitored his pulse. Tony Visconti sat in the corner, remembering all the albums they'd made together, all the creative battles and triumphs. Gary Oldman peeked in. "You don't have to stay, you know. Everyone would understand." David opened his eyes. "Would you leave? If this were your last show?" Gary had no answer. Of course David wouldn't leave. It wasn't in his nature to give up, to surrender, to let the illness win. "Besides," David added with a weak smile, "I need to see if the alien makes it home. I've been wondering about that for 40 years. Something shifted during those 10 minutes. David seemed to draw energy from some deep reserve, some place beyond the physical. When they returned to their seats for the second act, Iman noticed he sat up straighter. His eyes were clearer. It was as if he'd borrowed strength from the music itself, from the story of the alien who fell to Earth. The second act was darker, more introspective. Newton, knowing he would never return to his home planet, had to find meaning in his exile. He had to transform his isolation into something transcendent. When the final song played, Lazarus again, reprised, David whispered to Iman, "I'm ready, not for this to end, but for what comes next. I'll die in the body, but live forever through my music. That's enough. That's more than most people get." The show ended to thunderous applause. The cast took their bows. The audience was on its feet, sensing they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Director Ivo Van Hove stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight, the man who made this all possible. Please welcome David Bowie." The applause intensified. People were screaming. Some were crying without knowing why. "I can't," David told Corinne. "I can barely walk. I'll fall on that stage." "Then we'll help you," Iman said firmly. "This is your moment. Don't let the illness take this from you." With Iman on one side and Corinne on the other, David Bowie walked onto that stage. The applause was deafening. People were crying openly now. They didn't know exactly why, but they could feel it. This was special. This was historic. This was goodbye. David stood at the microphone. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at the audience, at the cast, at the set that brought his vision to life. Then he spoke, his voice still commanding despite his weakened state. "Thank you. Thank you for bringing my dream to life. Thank you for believing that an alien story could matter, that isolation could be beautiful, that transformation is always possible, even at the end." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Everyone leaned in. "This is my final public appearance." A gasp went through the crowd. What did that mean? And I couldn't have asked for a better way to say, not goodbye, never goodbye, just see you in the stars. The theater erupted. David smiled that small, knowing smile, waved, and let them guide him off stage. Once again, he had shaped his own ending, turning reality into art. Back in the dressing room, David wiped the makeup from his face, each stroke revealing the truth beneath, the weight loss, the exhaustion, the fragile man behind the legend. Karen watched silently, letting him have this final moment. "Thank you," he said softly. "Tonight you made me David Bowie again." "You're always David Bowie," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, but tonight, for a little while, I got to be him. And that's enough." Later in the car, he leaned into Iman, drained. "We did it," he whispered. "Yes, we did. I can rest now." Blackstar was released on his 69th birthday, his final work, full of messages about death and transformation. The Lazarus video showed him in a hospital bed singing, "Look up here, I'm in heaven." No one understood it at the time. 2 days later, David Bowie died at home, surrounded by family. When the world learned the news, everything suddenly made sense. The weight loss, the secrecy, the intensity of Blackstar. Lazarus hadn't been just an opening night. It had been a farewell. Gary Oldman later remembered Bowie's last Skype call, glitchy, frustrating, and ending with Bowie laughing and telling him to F off. "That was David," Gary said, "witty, stubborn, human, right to the end." Director Ivo Van Hove said, "He knew it was his last public moment. He wanted to witness his own story come alive. That's who he was, an artist until the final breath." Karen Alder added, "That night I wasn't just doing makeup, I was helping him write his last chapter. He wanted to be remembered as David Bowie, not as a patient. And today when we watch that December night, we finally see it all. The pain behind the smile, the courage behind the frailty, and the artist who chose to create instead of surrender.